everyone. Welcome to the Clinical Trials Community of Practice. My name is Nasia Safdar. I'm a physician in infectious diseases and the faculty director for this ICTR-supported series that we have. Today, we are delighted to welcome Mr. Marcus Johnson, who is the Associate Director for the NODES program. He will be talking about the Cooperative Studies Program, Network of Dedicated Enrollment Sites, or NODES, a driver for advancing CSP research and the broader VA research enterprise. Mr. Johnson, as I mentioned, is the Associate Director for the NODES program. And what that entails is, in this role, he provides executive leadership and strategic direction for the network. The network spans across 23 VA healthcare systems in 18 states and is an infrastructure that has increased the accessibility of CSP research to veterans across these sites of care. Prior to this position, he served in separate roles as both project manager and assistant director of operations for the CSP Epidemiology Center in Durham, as well as the strategic services associate for the Division of Gastroenterology, Department of Medicine at the Duke University School of Medicine. During his time at the Durham VA healthcare system, Mr. Johnson also, sorry, my phone just fell off, also served in acting roles as the health system specialist to the Deputy Chief of Staff and Associate Director. His primary interests are in developing strategies for increasing operational efficiencies in clinical research execution and healthcare delivery more broadly. Mr. Johnson received his master's degree in public health from the UNC Gilling School of Global Public Health and has master's degrees in business administration and health administration from Pfeiffer University. He has also served as adjunct faculty with the Department of Public Health, Brody School of Medicine, East Carolina University, and the UNC Gilling School of Global Public Health. We have been delighted to have had a lot of interactions with Marcus since the Madison VA is a node site. There's a lot of huge wealth of wisdom, Marcus, that you bring to your leadership of this program, and we are so grateful that you have chosen to share that with us today. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Nasia. I was excited when Dr. Safdar extended the invitation and Ms. Teresa Lenz reached out to me to present and speak with your group today. I was letting them know a little earlier, I'm a huge proponent of the community of practice model and believe that it's has the potential to be a powerful resource for the exchange of information, knowledge, and sharing of best practices amongst individuals in a particular discipline, and actually participate in a project management community of practice out of Duke as one of its founding members and currently serve as the steering committee. So I was really excited about the invitation, and hopefully if I do well today, you all invite me back for future talks and or potential collaborations. So I'm going to get off camera now. Just wanted to say hello, and so you all can focus on my slides. And I'll get started. Okay, so the focus of my talk today will be, again, talking about CSP nodes and it serving as a driver for advancing CSP research as well as the broader VA research enterprise. And so I'll start with just an overview of nodes and a brief overview of CSP, and then we'll hit into a specific example of how our network has been and will continue to be leveraged to benefit both CSP and the VA enterprise more broadly. So the VA Cooperative Studies Program is a clinical research infrastructure within the VA Office of Research and Development that was established to provide coordination for and enable cooperation on VA's multi-site clinical trials and epidemiologic studies. CSP has three main pillars comprised of our coordinating centers, our trial coordinating centers, our epi coordinating centers, and then nodes. So our coordinating centers work with investigators in the field or the VA healthcare system to plan, manage, and execute multi-site clinical research. Obviously, the trial center is doing that for clinical trials, and the epi center is doing that for epi studies. And I'll get into nodes here. And more specifically, nodes is a consortium of 23 VA healthcare systems with teams that are dedicated to conducting CSP studies to enhance the overall performance, compliance, and local management of CSP multi-site research. As Dr. Safdar mentioned, our network is across 18 states and 14 VISNs currently, so we're pretty well represented throughout the VA healthcare system. And this is just a map of our current sites. So we started back and so I neglected to say our trial coordinating centers, the first of those started back in the 1960s. CSP opened its EPI centers in the late 90s, specifically 1998, and then Nodes is kind of the newest entity or pillar within CSP, just having started in 2012. So we started them with initial 10 sites that are highlighted here in red, and added an additional 13 sites back in 22. So again, we have pretty broad geographic representation across the healthcare system, as well as states and business. Our primary goals within Nodes are to increase study enrollment rates, enhance participant safety and experiences in clinical research, as well as improve the overall efficiency and efficacy of CSP research. So all of our work falls under one of these three buckets ultimately. So within Nodes, CSP, and actually ORD, we use a goal-setting methodology called Objectives and Key Results that's used by a number of teams across organizations and industries to help set challenging goals, but helping to be able to measure the results of said goals and objectives. And so in addition to the three primary goals that I just spoke about, we have 5 core areas that focus on OKRs and excellence in enrollment and retention. It's tied to the first goal, obviously. Increasing veteran access to high quality clinical research, which is tied to the first 2 of those goals. We have an evaluation component that we use to monitor our performance across these areas. Communication and outreach OKR, as well as a Nodes expansion OKR, which is inclusive of both the expansion of sites that I just mentioned, as well as looking at opportunities to provide support more broadly than CSP to the enterprise. Of note, for the excellence in enrollment and retention core area, we'll be revising that soon to incorporate some formal approaches for monitoring quality and compliance across our sites. Right now, that's done individually within each individual study, but we haven't, we're just getting to the point of being able to set up a framework to do so and being able to monitor quality and compliance across our sites and across the network the same way that we do for enrollment. And so currently we're working on our Nodes OKRs for FY25 and 26. We do them in 2-year increments just because the environment and landscape in central office and larger VHA changes so frequently. So we found the 2-year OKR increments work well for us. Some selected best practices. I won't go through all of these, but we do have a couple that I'll highlight, particularly around enrollment. So our mobile recruitment strategy, which was one of the 2020 VHA Shark Tank winners. So that's a program conducted by the VHA Diffusion of Excellence for promising best practices. But in short, it involved, we created these portable stations that could be taken to atypical areas that aren't traditionally used to conduct enrollment and study visits for our studies. So we've taken them to CBOX, to various areas of a medical facility, the lobby, canteen, other areas. And they're comprised of a mobile cart, a laptop, cooler for in case there's a specimen collection, printer and fax for the consent documents, and phlebotomy tools if blood draws are involved. as I just mentioned, we're doing a lot to look at ways to improve enrollment by expanding access to our trials and studies to community-based outpatient clinics, or CBOCs. In terms of metrics, we worked with our coordinating centers several years ago to develop enrollment reports. Prior to those, each study team had a different format for their enrollment reports, and this varied across study teams, even within a single center. And so we worked with them to develop a standardized enrollment report with key enrollment, key performance indicators that are now used across all studies and sites and CSP studies. We work with our coordinating centers to provide feedback on the feasibility and operational viability of proposals during the planning process. We have a number of resources in terms of newsletters and a toolkit of best practices and resources that are available. We do a lot of training and mentorship is what I'll focus on as the example that I alluded to earlier, but we do a lot with hiring and training CSP personnel locally. We provide mentorship to non-node CSP study sites. In terms of personnel growth, we found that our cross-coverage staffing model, where we train CSP study coordinators on multiple CSP studies at a given site, has gotten good feedback in terms of giving coordinators kind of new areas or disciplines to work across, and has contributed to career growth and staff retention in those positions. I won't go through these as well, but these are just a list of selected list of publications to date. There's one related to the mobile recruitment stations that I just mentioned, if that's of interest, as well as the research site mentorship paper was really the foundation for all of our mentorship efforts now, and set the framework for that. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Some other publications across developing performance metrics for our network, which surprisingly in the current literature, there's not a lot of, in terms of clinical research networks that have published in the area of standardized performance metrics. So I feel like we're a leader in that area, both within and outside of VA, as well as some additional papers on staff engagement and hiring and training approaches for our CSP staff. So now that I've kind of given you a brief overview of nodes, I'll get into our nodes expansion and the site mentorship model that we employ to facilitate the onboarding and performance of our newer sites. And so there are numerous leadership and management challenges that are associated with organizational growth and expansion. These are both operational and strategic in nature. And so to address some of these challenges, we utilized a structured research mentorship approach to facilitate the onboarding and performance of our 13 new expansion sites into our established network. This effort aligned with current ORD strategic directions and was intended to increase veteran access to CSP and other multi-site research opportunities, as well as support ORD's research enterprise vision. And so the model that we used for this was based off of a pilot that we did several years ago, partnering with CSP 577 Confirm, one of our study teams in CSP. I believe that Madison is a participating site in that study. But CSP 577 had a primary objective of determining if a strategy of screening colonoscopy decreases colorectal cancer mortality over 10 years and average risk results as compared to annual fecal immunochemical testing or FIT screening. And so we, our node sites mentored 10 sites that were identified by the study team as experiencing difficulties with enrollment. We developed site-specific action plans with those sites and monitor their progress on actionable items in those plans over a 6-month period. And that pilot demonstrated improved enrollment across the 10 sites that we worked with. And so that kind of was the start of us realizing that nodes could potentially be beneficial in the area of research site mentorship. And we've done a number of other initiatives in this area since then. So how is this all relatable? So it's our hope that the node site mentorship model can serve as a useful strategy to facilitate organizational growth and, more specifically, the onboarding and performance of research sites for other groups that undergo expansion. So not limited to CSP, but within CSP, both at our national research study teams at the time of study launch or site expansion, as well across some of our other VA clinical research networks, precision oncology networks, LPOP, PopCap, the Million Veteran Program, NIH, Pharma. So these are all groups that this approach may be relatable to, as they're all involved in onboarding and bringing on new sites into their existing networks and studies. So this is just a high-level timeline of the nodes expansion process for your context. We released an RFA back in February of 2021 to the VA research community, outlining our intent to support, at that time, 10 additional medical centers to nodes. We ended up receiving about 23 applications. Those were reviewed by a subcommittee, convened subcommittee that evaluated those applications based on each site's plan for integrating nodes into their local clinical research infrastructure, facility support for the nodes director, and ADO, not listed here, facility resources and proposed plan for establishing CSP culture at the facility, and a proposed plan for establishing, that is listed twice. Ultimately, the subcommittee recommended that we move forward with bringing on 13 VA medical centers, which we, CSP Central Office approved, and we added 13 sites to our consortium back in, they were onboarded formally in January of 22. So the problem that we faced was, how can nodes expansion sites be onboarded into existing consortium while attempting to maintain our level of existing level of performance standards, and as well as facilitate the success of the new sites? Our solution was to employ the node site mentorship model that I previously spoke on as a solution to this problem. And so separate timeline in terms of the model, or this iteration of the model itself. We established a site mentorship work group back in October of 2020 that really had a primary focus on helping us figure out as a network how we could provide mentorship services to other groups outside of CSP, both within and outside of CSP, whether it be other clinical research networks, non-node CSP study sites, as well as our expansion sites. And that work group was comprised of nodes directors, ADOs, and which are CSP associate directors of operations. So I'll take a step back. I didn't get into this earlier, but each node site has a nodes leadership team that's comprised of nodes director or directors. These are clinician investigators with extensive experience in trials and clinical research, as well as our nodes ADOs, which really manage the day-to-day operations of the respective node site. And then moving on into October of 2021, we developed a 12-month mentorship framework that consisted of really several components. There was a broader mentorship plan, which was inclusive of a specific implementation plan, performance metrics, and as well as an evaluation plan for how we would evaluate or measure our success against those metrics. So just to speak a little bit about the mentorship pairings. So we had, if you recall, we started with 10 sites in 2012, but we were bringing on 13 new sites. And so we had envisioned originally having a one-to-one pairing of sites, but we're only able to do the one-to-one pairing with 7 sites. And since we had 3 additional sites, 3 of our original sites were actually paired with 2 sites in a 2-to-1 pairing. And these pairings were established based on several factors, such as geographic proximity between sites, any previously established connections between sites from other research projects or initiatives, as well as the overlap of CSP studies that they had in common. And so when building a new program, our mentor sites were an asset in providing prompt guidance to expansion sites, providing solutions to on-site level challenges related to onboarding into the network, as well as executing CSP clinical research activities at the site. Additionally, our mentorship plan included frequent meetings, both virtual and in person, between our mentor and mentee sites. So in the first 3 months of that 12-month plan that I've mentioned, our notes directors met once a month, and our ADOs at the site pairs met twice a month. In months 4 through 9, the directors transitioned to a meeting quarterly and the ADOs monthly. And we were also very fortunate to be able to include in-person site visits. So having the mentor site visit the mentee site and vice versa, just to kind of observe operations, walk the halls, talk to stakeholders. I think for the mentee sites, it was a really great shattering and observation experience for them to see how the more experienced nodes operated. And then for the mentor sites, it really gave them an opportunity to see firsthand any potential barriers to performance or success that the mentee sites had, and try to troubleshoot and help problem solve things on site. So I think there was pretty good feedback around being able to incorporate those site visits. So I won't go into all of the OKRs or metrics that we developed for the mentorship plan, but I'll highlight a couple. These are the objectives that we had. The first was raising awareness of research. With our first 10 sites, we found that was really instrumental in their success, in terms of meeting with facility leadership to share progress on current, upcoming, and potential initiatives. The key results of that were that the nodes team would meet with the Associate Chief of Staff for Research every other month for the first year, post-site selection, and then at least twice a year, and would aim to meet with medical center leadership 3 times a year, and then biannually. Again, we found that these kind of prescribed meetings were very beneficial in terms of helping facility leadership and stakeholders know who nodes were, helped increase awareness of CSP, and I think ultimately contributed to the provision of resources for our respective nodes and CSP study teams locally at our sites. Secondly, knowledge sharing. So having our nodes teams participate in the regular scheduled calls and meetings that we have, with an objective of participating in the dissemination of best practices, strategic planning, and networking with other colleagues across our program. And so the key result of that objective was that our nodes directors would attend at least 75% of our monthly nodes program calls, and our ADOs have a separate monthly call, and that they would attend at least 10 out of 12 of those monthly calls in a given fiscal year. And then lastly, an objective around problem solving and strategy. So being able to have dedicated time to discuss study progress, help solve study execution, challenges and barriers, and strategies to address those. And so for that key result, we had our nodes directors and ADOs at our expansion sites meet at least twice a month locally, although I think they ended up meeting and still meet much more frequently to address issues as needed. And so those were for our expansion sites. For our original sites, we already had established OKRs. And again, these are somewhat similar in nature, particularly around the knowledge sharing objective. For our original sites, we transitioned to having more outcome-focused OKRs. I think initially we thought it'd be helpful for our original sites as well as our expansion sites to have very prescribed meetings and things to check off with key stakeholders, and transition more to, at least with our original sites, looking more at outcomes instead of the process. So transitioning from being process to outcomes focused, and the key results for raising awareness of research included having each of our original node sites being able to identify tangible examples of facility support, whether it relates to HR and staffing, space allocation, or other resources. skipping over knowledge sharing, that's the same essentially, but data quality, our original sites have for some time also provided oversight and execution of smart pre-audits with CSP study team. So again, I think we have about 12 OKRs for our original sites, and as well as a number of them for our expansion sites. But these were just selected ones that I wanted to highlight. So results, the impact of the model, we were able to look at the impact of the model on sites performance as it relates to our OKRs. Again, for our original sites, we were able to look at it prior to implementing this, the nodes expansion, as well as after. And for our expansion sites, obviously we didn't have that data prior to the mentorship implementation, but we were able to measure it between FY22 and 23. So after those expansion sites had joined the consortium. We also collected qualitative data from sites on what they perceived to be the strengths and weaknesses of the model, as well as any significant lessons learned. So in August of 23, Notes ADOs had an in-person annual meeting where they gave presentations on their mentorship experiences by their site pairs. And in September of 2023, the mentorship period formally ended, and our expansion sites now follow the same OKRs that we had in place for our OKRs. So as a network, we're all currently on the same metrics, which is much easier from an evaluation perspective. So I know there's a lot of data on this slide, but what it really highlights along the x-axis, we have our 13 expansion sites de-identified, and the y-axis is the percentage of OKRs met across each site as compared between 2022, FY22 and 23. You'll see on average across all sites between 22 and 23, our expansion sites did experience a 33% increase in their achievement of our established OKRs, which is pretty significant just across one fiscal year. We also wanted to look at our original sites to see what impact participating on mentorship might have on their operations. And so we pulled in their data, similar data, but also FY21 data for our original sites. And you'll see the decline of 88% on average in FY21 to 81%. So a slight dip in achievement of our OKRs for original sites. From an opportunity cost perspective and something to take away, I believe that mentorship is very valuable, but it does take a lot of time and resources and from day-to-day activities. And as we think about scaling this model to other groups, I think it'll be important to make sure that the level of resources, an adequate level of resources are provided to mentor sites, given the huge undertaking it is to really be assigned to a site and walk them through a number of activities over a defined period of time. So looking at study enrollment specifically, both across our original and expansion sites, we looked at enrollment data from FY20 to FY24. So this is FY24 to date, October of 23 through this past April. So about 7 months of data in FY24. And across the original sites, we have, the blue line is the average number of studies that each site has across our 10 original sites. So the number of actively enrolling CSP studies. And then the orange line is the average percentage of instances where our node sites are meeting the enrollment targets for the studies that they participate in. And you'll see, unfortunately, that declined from 93% in FY20 to 76% in our original sites. So again, I think there are a number of factors related to this. Obviously, this incorporates COVID. We've had a number of study delays due to budgetary challenges, not only within CSP, but ORD more broadly. And so I think the mentorship, along with some of these other kind of external factors were all contributors to our enrollment decreasing across our original 10 sites. But it's useful to note. And then for our expansion sites, comparing FY22, 23, and 24 data, and you'll see that from FY22, there was actually a slight uptick from 62% to 67% in terms of the percentage of them meeting their study enrollment targets across studies at their respective sites. Also of note, our expansion sites had fewer studies on average at about 3.6 or 4 studies per site. Our original sites had about 5 studies per site on average across these time periods. Also a lot of data, but just really quickly, this looks at enrollment at a little more granular level. We went over the average percent goal data that was on the previous 2 slides, but we also looked at the percentage of times that node sites were in the top half of participating study sites in a given study, the percentage of instances where they were were meeting 50% of the study's enrollment target, as well as the percentage that they were in the top third of participating sites for enrollment in CSP studies at their sites. And you'll see that data for on average across FY20 to 24 for our original sites, as well as FY22 to 24 for our expansion sites. In terms of qualitative site feedback, based on the responses that we got from ADOs, the majority were appreciative of the meeting frequency and being able to have a knowledgeable mentor site to prompt questions to. I think the open communication and responsiveness was expressed as being beneficial to our mentee sites, as well as the overall structure of the mentorship model. These are some specific quotes from one of our mentee and mentor site pairs. From the mentee site, one-on-one regular meetings between site ADOs allowed for productive discussions around site-specific challenges, successes, and implementation plans. From one of our the ADOs at our mentor sites, in understanding our mentee sites' unique challenges, goals, and strengths, we were able to provide tailored guidance and support to meet their specific needs while helping them navigate their program responsibilities more effectively. Some of the challenges around our model were around the timing and duration of the site visit. I think all of the site pairs expressed that they wish the site visits could have been a little longer. I think we allocated about 2 days per site visit, but some expressed as long as a week would be beneficial. That'd be a little bit challenging from a budgetary perspective, but the message was that they wanted more time at the sites, in-person time with their respective mentor and or mentee sites. Not really something that the mentorship model could control, but delays with HR and staffing were expressed as challenges, as well as the startup delays with CSP studies that I alluded to earlier. Some difficulty with prioritizing site initiation tasks. I think in future iterations, having clear checklists or guidance documents around things that need to be done would be helpful for our mentee sites. So the takeaway message today is that our nodes mentorship model has provided value to the VA research enterprise, both within CSP and ORD VHA more broadly, and as well as to our veterans through its facilitation of site performance, specifically as it relates to enrollment, as well as onboarding, startup, and maybe a useful approach for other groups to employ. And the model demonstrates how CSP nodes can contribute to the advancement of research across the broader enterprise. For the sake of time, there were a couple of other examples that I didn't include, but to talk about those briefly as they relate to mentorship. We have an initiative that we're leading within nodes called CSP Access, where We've identified 3 rural VA facilities and have paired them with node sites, and they've provided that mentorship has led to our node sites providing mentorship on how to really help those smaller VA facilities grow their respective research programs. So not only our nodes teams, but the research and development office leadership participates in those mentorship meetings, specifically the ACOS-R and Research AO. And its objective is really to improve access to rural veterans for our CSP studies by helping these smaller sites kind of build their infrastructure. And it's already resulted in those 3 sites receiving or being selected for more CSP studies than they had previously, as well as receiving more site selection and feasibility surveys than they had prior to access onboarding. So we're hoping that whether it be in FY25 or future years, that we'll be able to expand access to additional smaller rural sites. And we're currently working on a manuscript to describe access and some of the lessons learned that we've had for that. So I think I'll stop there. I just wanted to give credit to one of my colleagues at the Palo Alto CSP Coordinating Center who helped me with developing these slides. Parnaz Ohavarde. Without her, some of the graphics and stuff here, that's not my skill set. I would have failed miserably. So I really appreciate her help with helping getting this PowerPoint set up. And then lastly, I'm happy to take any questions from the group, and my contact information is included below. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Marcus. Looks like there are some questions. People should feel free to unmute themselves. Mihaela, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much, Marcus, for this summary, and I'm glad to see this effort in the VA. I'm a respiratory investigator. I'm a physician scientist, and I care a lot about in the VA clinic of our veterans who developed pulmonary fibrosis, which is a key factor in the deployment-related disease profile. And our patients are usually very sick and require care in a specialized center. So you are not recruiting them much from CBOX, mainly in the central locations. However, questions pertaining to clinical trials and even mechanistic trials in these populations require larger sample size that are not recruitable in a single center, and therefore this would be very fit for multi-center design, and you would argue for nodes, cooperative studies. However, I want to get your perspective on 2 issues. Number one, in our experience, because of the comorbidity profiles of the VA, particularly VA patients, many of these veterans being on narcotics, having severe cardiovascular disease, do not qualify for interventional clinical studies. So, for example, from a pool of 25 veterans, we were able to enroll 1 veteran in our most recent study. Additionally, this pulmonary fibrosis is at the core of the DoD recent respiratory research portfolio. So there is really importance to study this disease from multiple aspects. So my question to you is, what's the VA perspective in helping enrollment for populations that are difficult to enroll in the VA because of the reasons I've mentioned? Yet this is the central question for the DoD and to know in caring for these patients. Is there a plan B, recruitment plan for these veterans to ultimately gain the knowledge we need to care for them? Like, are you saying that you cannot, if you cannot enroll veterans, you are going to disqualify and close down a study, a center, part of the node, because you only allow veterans to be enrolled, even though the question is so important to know for caring a veteran? You know what I mean? We are facing a dilemma. So I want to know whether you thought through, and the way to look potentially is get some data by topics in recruitment, not by center. Look by topics. Which topics are easier or not to recruit? I mean, when you attach a colonoscopy study, everybody needs to have a colonoscopy for clinical reasons. But for pulmonary fibrosis, not all the testing we do and research we do often is not for clinical reasons. So have you looked by research topic in your enrollment plan, which is not greatest, I see, with a 60% in the new expansion studies? Have you ruled look by research topic and address with different strategies to enhance research, recruitment, albeit not only veterans, in the studies that struggle? And ultimately, what's the consequence of a study? What's the consequence on the center if they, for example, fail to recruit pulmonary fibrosis, like my case? I mean, from 25 patients, we enrolled only one. What are the implications for the node center as a center if they, for reasons independent to them, fail to recruit? Are you going to kick them out from the network? Elaborate question, may not have answers, but I really want your group to think and potentially report back to us.
Thanks, Mihaela. Marcus, any thoughts on that?
No, it's a great question. And I don't admittedly have a lot of experience in the cystic fibrosis population space, but it's a great question. I think.
Sorry, it's not cystic fibrosis, it's pulmonary fibrosis.
Oh, sorry,
Totally
pulmonary fibrosis. We do have a focus on, I think you remember one of our goals with the nodes was to improve, veterans' experiences during their participation in trials, which all of our efforts to increase access to CSP research, it falls under that. And so we are doing some work to look at, different groups of traditionally underrepresented populations. So we have an effort that we've partnered with, just a couple examples, the Women's Health Practice-Based Research Network, where we have dedicated staff that are working with study teams on developing strategies to improve the enrollment of women veterans into our trials. I spoke a little bit about CSP Access, which has a focus on improving rural veteran representation to our trials. And so we do have a couple of areas where we're looking to improve access to those populations. As it relates to, as you're aware, veterans having more and oftentimes more significant comorbidities than the general population, it does make their enrollment into our studies a bit more challenging. And I think there are a couple things that I'm hoping nodes can work on more specifically. One being more involved in the CSP study design and planning process, particularly when it comes to inclusion, exclusion criteria. When we talk about feasibility and making them as less stringent as possible to make sure that we're able to bring veterans into our trials, as well as looking at ways to bring the research to veterans as opposed to having the traditional model of having them, having to come to clinic exam rooms or the office spaces to meet with coordinators to enroll. And so I think we do have to do a better job of figuring out how to work and enroll veterans from populations as it relates to a specific condition, particularly when they would have a lot of challenges with enrollment and participation. So I don't have a great answer, but it's definitely something I think we need to look into more. Stop there.
Great, thanks very much.
And I will say, back to the example of I was speaking to about women veterans and rural veterans, we are, particularly our women's health group, they have done a lot of meta reviews of best practices as it relates to women veterans enrollment. And I think that we have to systematically do that across populations as we continue to enroll, whether it be with regards to gender, race, ethnicity, the geographic location of the veteran, or some of the comorbidities that you discussed.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify quickly that the majority of, talking about study design, the criteria that are usually set are for safety issues and ethical issues. So there is not much wiggle room there in study designs. Investigators, and you really work with that in mind. So I think it's more access, more thinking in the direction of expansion and of plan B, planning as to what can you do to enroll. So I can tell you that there are efforts to form a network, IPF network across the VA network, but those are stalled by this problem. We cannot enroll enough veterans, and the focus only to enroll veterans. So that kicks us in the foot all the time.
That's a good point. I mean, I spoke about inclusion, exclusion criteria, but I do agree that in addition to that, whatever the criteria are, having a clear and well-defined enrollment plan, or a couple of plans to your point, for how to deal with special populations, I think will be important moving forward, and something that we can work with our coordinating centers on. Again, not knowing the population very well, I don't know if there's been any thought in terms of looking at doing more for these types of populations, pragmatic or point of care trials that might not involve the level of infrastructure and/or interactive engagement with study coordinators on site, but working more directly in the EHR, and hopefully using that as an approach to reduce the burden on veterans and make our trials a little more accessible to those populations.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions for the group or from the group? I can maybe ask a question while others are thinking, Marcus. So, when we're trying to enroll participants for research, there definitely seems to be an art and a science to it, especially for a new site like us. And it has been very helpful to us to have a mentor site like Heinz, which has had such a long experience of effectively recruiting people. So are there some things that sometimes I think we focus more on the art and not as much on the science of recruitment, like what is the actual patient population that you have access to that you can recruit? So what has your experience been in helping sites sort through this key? The rest is all sort of secondary to that. If you don't have participants, you don't have data, and the rest all follows. So to me, the biggest thing is, can you effectively recruit? And I know you mentioned some in your talk, but if you have ideas for how PIs should be thinking about running diagnostics on their processes if they can't recruit, how do you develop a data-driven approach to recruitment challenges, as opposed to maybe we just aren't, approaching enough people, things like that. Does that make sense?
It does. So I think, we do feed a lot of feedback to the coordinating centers, along with non-node CSP study sites, on what we're seeing at the site or boots on the ground level. And I know that data is aggregated and reviewed by the national study teams, and to the extent possible, addressed through protocol amendments, et cetera. And so I think, the mentorship pilot that I alluded to with Confirm, or CSP 577, I think one of the keys that we found was that, nationally, study teams can sometimes just issue broader blanket solutions to these barriers. But the mentorship approach is helpful because it allows for like really specific or action plans that are specific to the site. So what impacts Madison, the considerations, maybe not even within a given trial, but across your studies may be different than what it looks like at Hines. And so I think to your point, looking at the data at a more granular level, site level, and realizing, trying to figure out what the specific challenges are is something that we'll continue to try to do more of. Again, we do it when we mentor non-node CSP study sites, but I think even with our node sites, we should think through a better way to kind of take a lot of their institutional knowledge and get it collected and organized in some fashion.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Just gonna check chat one more time to see if there's any questions. It doesn't look like there are questions. So let me conclude by thanking you again, Marcus, for your wonderful presentation. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Bye.
Bye-bye.